Namaste. I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell from the Unity Center here in beautiful San Diego. Our mission statement is transforming lives and healing our world. Each week, we partner with Spirit to bring that statement to life through our Sunday services, social media, email, and our YouTube channel, and in the work we're doing with our newly created Anti-Racism Institute. Together with our Unity community, we are working to be the change we most want to see in our world. So we've been on this journey together of pulling out wisdom from some of these very old stories in the Bible, some of them having been allegorical stories, meaning they're not meant to even begin to be taken in any sense as literal or historical, but we've also looked at a few historical stories as well that need to be understood in the context of the evolution of the Bible itself and so forth. Today I want to talk to you about the topic of faith and how to unlock it, to not block it, to unlock it. And in Unity, it's not that we discard the Bible, we don't, but we look at it very differently. We look at it through mystical and metaphysical eyes. We understand that there is wisdom contained in its stories. We understand that we can see ourselves in the evolution of many of the characters in the Bible and the experiences, the difficulties that they faced. We say in Unity that we are principle-based, that we are not Bible-based. We don't take it literally. And if you really think about it, if you really think about it, there is no one, even the most fundamentalist person, that takes everything in the Bible literally. Because if you did, and if you acted upon everything literally in the Bible, you'd be thrown in jail. Okay, there are statements, there are ideas contained in the Bible that are absolutely illegal. So everyone who looks to the Bible for any sort of inspiration or instruction is looking at it through their own lens or the lens of their church, the lens of their faith. And there's a wide continuum, and that's the point I'm trying to make, in how the Bible is seen depending upon who it is that is teaching from it. And so in Unity, as I've said, we look at it through mystical and metaphysical eyes. We see ourselves in the various characters. We see and recognize the potential of our own evolution into God consciousness or Christ consciousness. And so we're going to talk about Abraham today. How many of you remember anything at all about the story of Abraham? Okay, just a few of you, and that's okay. You're not being quizzed on your Bible knowledge, but I just wanted to kind of know where we are. So Abraham is considered to be the father of the Hebrews. He is a patriarch. He's considered to be the father of the three monotheistic religions in the world today: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Out of Abraham's descendants was birthed eventually these three great monotheistic religions. And so Jews hold Abraham in high regard. Christians trace Jesus' lineage through Abraham's son Isaac. And so Christians recognize the importance of Abraham. And Muslims do as well. They recognize through the son Ishmael, the founder of the Islamic faith, Muhammad. And so this character in the Old Testament who lived about 2000 BC is highly regarded. And if you think about it, the father of the three major religions in the world, and yet we don't seem to be able to get along. I mean, I find that mind-boggling, and I feel a certain affinity toward this person who did live in history, this person, Abraham, and what we might be able to learn about him and the idea of trying to bring us together in a common brotherhood and a common sisterhood. In 2006, I was invited to be part of a very important project Some of you may recall, because you might have been with us at the Unity Center at that time, I was invited to travel to Istanbul, Turkey, as part of the initial planning group that was going to create a pilgrimage route in the Middle East, retracing the footsteps of the patriarch Abraham. And I, along with Dr. Kathy Hearn from Centers for Spiritual Living, Tom Zender, the then Chief Executive Officer of Unity Worldwide Headquarters or Ministries, and William Ury, who was the co-founder of the Harvard Negotiation Project and actually the creator of this whole idea. We met in Istanbul with a very interfaith group of people to begin to plot out a pilgrimage route that ordinary people could walk in brotherhood, in sisterhood, in unity, to help bring a greater sense of peace. That hasn't happened yet. They're still working on it. No wonder, right? But who was this guy Abraham, and why even bother with something like that? And so I want to acquaint you with a very long history and a very short summary of who this person Abraham was. He was originally called Abram. He was married to a woman, more than one, but married because that was common in those days, by the name of Sarah. And over time, as they followed God's guidance and God's instruction in their life, which I'll get to in just a moment and how it links to unlocking our faith, their names were changed. They were changed from Abram to Abraham and from Sarai to Sarah. Sidebar here. Whenever there is a name change in the Bible, it's important. It is mystically and metaphysically symbolic of a change in consciousness. And maybe you can relate to that. Maybe you can relate to something happening in your life that put you on an entirely different trajectory, that caused you to develop in a way that you never would have otherwise. Can you nod your head? Can you relate to anything like that? Something so fundamental, so significant that happened in your life, or an idea that you read or somebody taught you that fundamentally changed your life. That's the idea of a change in consciousness. And oftentimes in the Bible, it is shrouded in this beautiful mystery of a name change. And so that's important, that over the journey of Abram's life into the becoming of Abraham is this evolution of consciousness. So he was the first of the Hebrew patriarchs. He's revered, as I said, by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And why? Why? Because of the way he listened to and followed the instruction of God. We're told in the book of Genesis that at the age of 75, he got a message from God. He got divine guidance that he was to leave his homeland and make a very long and difficult journey to what would eventually be called or become the Promised Land. Now stop and think about it for a moment. 75 years old. And 75 then was probably a lot more difficult than 75 today, right? Life was harder then. Have you ever had a major move in your life, like moving across country and having to pick up everything and start all over again? Raise your hand if you can relate to that. So imagine that at 75. Yeah, I know some of you shaking your head. It's like, oh boy, not exactly what I would want to do. And here it's not maybe your job telling you you have to, or your family, but it's this sense of God telling you just pick up and move. Pick up and move. What would it take to do that? It would take some faith. It would take some obedience. It would take some paying attention. And I know obedience is not a word that New Thought people like. I know that. So try to get a little warm and fuzzy with it, just a tiny bit, and then you can discard it later if you want. But there's a certain element of this idea of obedience and faith that really, really are important, that we are at least willing to explore. Abraham's important because his journey and some of the things he had to go through can help us kind of unpack what we can do to live our life with greater faith. And when we do live our life with greater faith, doors of opportunity open for us that we move through. Things work better when we work them through the mindset of faith. And he's clearly a model of it at 75 years old. To get this sense, to get this guidance, however you want to frame that in your mind, get up and move. 75 years old, get moving, get thee out of thy country. In the Old Testament King James Version, it is said. There are two overarching themes in Abraham's life. And the two overarching themes, I think, are these: that the plan of our life is to progress and evolve. That's the first. Let me repeat that. The plan of our life is to progress and evolve. If you were to take the time to read all of the chapters in Genesis that describe the story of Abraham's journey, you would see that there is an evolution, and it's not a perfect straight line forward. There are detours, there are bumps in the road, but there's an evolution from where he started, not just physically or literally, but metaphysically, to where he ended. There is, your life and my life is meant to progress and to evolve. Even biologically, we are hardwired to progress and evolve. If we were not, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. The human species has progressed and evolved, right? Has had to grow and adapt to radically changing circumstances and environments. And we can see that across a huge span of time, more easily, really, than we can when we're right in the midst of it, right? That we really are meant to grow, to progress, to evolve. And in order to do that, we have to let go of some of what is comfortable and familiar. Abraham had to let go of his homeland, whatever was familiar to him and to his kin, to let go of that, and to move forward. What's the saying? You can't steal first. Wait a second, let me read it, because it's one of those baseball things, and I always mess them up. You can't steal second base while holding on to first. I'm more familiar with you can't put new wine into old wineskins, right? We have to be willing to let go. We have to be like Abraham, to get up and out of what is familiar and to be willing to move forward. And the second realization, overarching realization of his life, is that we're rewarded for that. We're rewarded for that. On the other side, if you will, of our willingness to listen, to grow, to evolve, is something more desirable than what we are experiencing right now. Something that maybe fits us better, that plays to our strengths better, that allows us to let our light shine a little bit brighter. Abraham was told, I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and I will make thy name great, and you will be a blessing. The more we are willing to allow ourselves to stretch and grow, to let go of what's been familiar, to move on to what life is saying, this is your next place, this is your next iteration, the more we are willing to do that, the better everything else becomes. The more we are blessed, the more we are prospered. I want to share with you just a few takeaways that I get from this story of Abraham. You might get completely different takeaways were you to read the whole thing. So I'm not saying this is the only way to look at it, but this is a way that I look at it. Keys for unlocking our faith that we can get from Abraham. Number one, it absolutely is essential that we be willing to listen, for that still small voice. That means learning to turn down the chatter up here. Any of you still have chatter that goes on here? As soon as you sit down to be quiet, what happens? It gets louder, doesn't it? It shouldn't. I don't think it should be that way, but it seems to be that way. And so it's the consistent practice to turn the chatter down, to quiet the mind. There is something to be said for doing some of that in community, that we build upon one another's energy. We really do. We can build upon one another's consciousness. I think, sidebar here, it's in part what Jesus was referring to when he said, where two or more are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. That when we are gathered in a spiritual practice, it doesn't have to be perfect, but when we are gathered together with the intention to practice spiritually, with the intention to be mindful of God, of a higher presence, a higher being, there is something that's amplified when we do that together. And so, to me, one of the first things from Abraham is a willingness to listen. And the second, I've already alluded to, is being willing to let go of the old, or to let go of what was always so familiar. Didn't we have to do that during the pandemic? I mean, in a way, that was such a shakeup for so many of us. No matter how good, indifferent, or bad our life was before the pandemic, when it hit and when we were told, you got to stay in your homes, you've got to have your masks on, don't go to work, learn how to work remotely, everyone had to let go of whatever their familiar way of living was, right? To step into a completely or largely different way of living. So we have some familiarity with it. We probably can remember maybe a tad bit of reluctance to some of it. You know, how do we usually greet change? The human spirit, not you, I know we're all ascended, we don't greet, but we know that other people greet change with, oh no, I don't want that. Not with, oh wow, isn't this interesting? Right? That's a more playful approach. Isn't this interesting? Isn't this change? Isn't this new something that's trying to grab my attention and trying to happen in my life? It's going to require me to do what? To let go of some of what was. The you that is being called into a new dream or a new goal or a new relationship or a new job or a new place to live is going to have to grow and change. You're going to have to let go of some things. And the letting go isn't always easy, but it can be done. Abraham certainly took his whole crew, got up, and left. Third takeaway from Abraham for me is he was known for his obedience. He was known for his obedience. And remember, I acknowledge that many of us in New Thought, myself included, I don't really like the word obedience. But in a way, there's also something beautiful about it. Not so much obedience to something external, but obedience or following closely, being deeply connected with a higher truth and wisdom, aligning with it. In Abraham, he aligned with what God told him to do. Now, I want to share a little piece of the story that oftentimes people struggle with Abraham, especially if they remember some of their Bible stories growing up. We have Abraham and his son Isaac, right? And some of you may remember what Abraham was told by God, according to the way the story goes in the Bible. He was to do what with his son Isaac? Well, he was to sacrifice him. But if you really read it, he was to lift his son up to be sacrificed. But let me stop there. From many rabbinical scholars, they absolutely hold to be true that in no way was the ultimate request that he was going to sacrifice his son Isaac. That they say, and I think they're onto something, that the instruction that Abraham was to be obedient to was the willingness to lift his son up, to go right to the edge, but that he was never going to have to go all of the way. Does that put a different perspective on it to you? It certainly does to me. What it suggests to me personally, is that you and I are called to follow through. Abraham followed through with the instruction. The instruction was to lift his child up. He followed through with that. Nothing happened to Isaac. Nothing bad happened to Isaac. We are called to follow through. It's a little bit like Martin Luther King Jr.'s statement that faith is the willingness to take the first step when you don't see the whole staircase. If God is and if you don't like the word God, use spirit or your higher self or divine wisdom, whatever word helps you get there without bringing unnecessary baggage. When there's something that's been planted in your mind and heart as a goal for you, the obedience or the follow-through is that you may only get 2 parts of that goal. You may get the image, the thing you're striving for. It could be new business, a new relationship, a new way of living, I don't know what it is for you. But you get the image or the sense of what the it is. Are you still with me? And you get an idea of what the first step might be. It might be picking up the phone and calling a particular person you haven't called in a long time. It might be going out and buying a book or reading something. It might be checking and doing some research about something related to your goal on the internet. It can seem so absolutely ordinary and unimportant, but the obedience is the follow through to do the first step. Just like Martin Luther King Jr. said, faith is a willingness to take the first step when you don't see the whole staircase. The follow through, the obedience of Abraham being willing to follow the instruction, lift your child up. So maybe you have a slightly different feel in your stomach or gut for the word obedience. So 4th out of the 5 takeaways I want to share with you of Abraham, to me, is he was known for his resourcefulness. You know, if you ever think that the Bible is boring, it really isn't. If you actually sit down and read it not like a church person, but read it just to try to understand some of what's written in there and some of the stories, there's a lot of drama. It makes any sort of soap opera we have ever created in contemporary times pale in comparison. Abraham was, in fact, in the New Testament, only certain books got approved to go into the New Testament because they were more palatable than others. I won't go any further than that. You can read between the lines. He's known for his resourcefulness. So on their journey to Canaan, a lot of things happened. And one of the things that happened is he traveled with his wife, Sarah, then Sarai. Sarah was beautiful. And in traveling in those days, in that culture, at that time, with a beautiful woman could be a death threat. And he believed that he might be killed and the rest of his family might be killed because Sarah was so beautiful, Pharaoh and Pharaoh's people would want her for themselves. And so Abraham, being resourceful, now this sounds terrible to us today, but you've got to put it in the context of what was considered normal then, passes Sarah off as his sister. So that in passing her off as his sister, he mitigates the chance of him and his family being threatened and killed. Pharaoh's people notice Sarah and decide to let Pharaoh know about how beautiful Sarah is. Pharaoh decides to take Sarah for himself and pays Abraham handsomely for Sarah. Pretty resourceful. I'm not saying agree with what he did. You have got to put it in the context of what was considered normal then. He's trying to protect his family. This is a way that he thinks that he can do it. He's trying to be resourceful, to be obedient, to follow through with the instruction that he's been given, the steps that he's been given in his staircase, so to speak. And without going into all of the details, what eventually happens is Pharaoh finds out what Abraham did and isn't too happy, gives Sarah back to Abraham and says, you can keep all the money, just go. What it says to me is you do not do what Abraham did. That's not what it says to me. But it does suggest to me that along the way, yes, you can laugh and giggle, along the way, as we are journeying, as we are trying to figure out what our next steps are in the staircase, that we've got to be willing to be resourceful. We have to be willing to be resourceful. It means that we hold as clearly in our mind's eye what it is we are working toward. But we know that the path to get there will probably have lots of twists and turns and will look very different than what it looks like when we first start out. Can you pull this back and relate it to yourself in your own journey somewhere where you have been journeying toward something important to you in your life? And you thought it was going to go this way, step by step by step, and it was going to look like X. Are you still with me? Only to find that there were quite a few twists and turns along the way that required you to rethink. That's what resourcefulness is, to rethink, to refigure out, how do I deal with this obstacle that's come up? And not to assume that the obstacle means a stop sign. It's a detour sign. That's what I think is beneath the surface of some of Abraham's way of working through getting to where he believed God wanted him to be. And the very last, I hope I haven't scared you with some of the details of the story of Abraham. I hope you're hearing what I'm intending to message. The very last takeaway that I would share is this, that Abraham's known for his monotheistic belief. He's considered to be the first real monotheist, the first real to believe that whatever this thing is that you and I call God, that it's just one, not many, but one. In unity, we say, one God, but many paths. And the paths can look very, very different. And at the circumference of the paths, at the edge or on the surface of the paths, on the edge of a religion, the religions can look very, very different from each other. But as a practitioner of whatever the religion or faith is, journeys more and more to the very heart, the very core, the most important elements of that faith, they begin to look a lot more alike and sound a lot more alike and feel a lot more alike. Our very first principle of our 5 principles in unity is there is but one presence and one power in the universe. We say God, the good, omnipotent, that there is an essence, there is a presence, there is a force for good in the universe, within us, between us, and all around us. And we can align ourselves with that. And to the degree that we do, to the degree that we live from that understanding, we do find that our life becomes incredibly blessed, that we find our way through difficult times with greater ease and grace, and we find ourselves healing, we find ourselves prospering, we find ourselves being a blessing to others. So I hope in my rambling and my sharing, trying to pull out elements of the story of Abraham, that there's at least an idea or two that is worthy of you turning over in your mind and seeing if it doesn't help you to live your faith, your life with greater faith. That'll make a tremendous difference. Namaste.